3 days before my daughter-in-law's birthday, I thought I was protecting my peace, until I saw a red car across the street and realized my own family had been smiling while planning something that could change my life. I was standing in a bank parking lot on a Tuesday morning in November when I saw it. Red, gleaming, a silver bow the size of a hubcap stretched across the hood like someone had gift-wrapped a bad decision. It sat across the street at the dealership lot, angled just so, catching the pale winter sun the way expensive things know how to catch light. The kind of car that turns heads not because it's tasteful, but because it's trying so hard not to be. And there, on the dealership's glass door, in the reflection of the street behind me, I caught my own face. 63 years old. Blue sweater, good shoes, the ones I wear when I need to feel steady. My hands were shaking. I was shaking because I had just come out of a meeting with a young banker named Melissa, who had slid a printed transaction report across her desk and asked me, carefully, whether I had authorized a loan application in my name. I had not. I had not authorized anything. And that car across the street, the one with the silver bow and the dealership sticker still on the window, had been purchased 3 days before my daughter-in-law's birthday using a credit line attached to my name. I stood in that parking lot with the cold coming through my coat, and I looked at that car and I did not cry. I had done my crying 2 nights earlier, alone in the hallway at midnight, gripping a water glass so hard I was surprised it didn't break. I was done with crying. I was just getting started with everything else. My name is Dorothy Parker. I am 63 years old, recently retired from 21 years as an office administrator for a mid-size architecture firm, widowed in 2018 when my husband Ron passed from a stroke that came without warning on a Thursday morning. I live in the house Ron and I bought in 1989 in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, a garden I have been slowly expanding for 15 years, a kitchen that smells like coffee, and the lemon verbena plant on the windowsill. I raised one child, Ethan. Ethan is 36. He has his father's jaw and his father's way of tilting his head when he's thinking, and I have loved him since the moment he existed with the specific ferocity of a woman who had one person to pour it all into. He was a good boy. I want to say that clearly, because what comes next requires context. He was a good boy who became, somewhere along the way, a man who made choices I did not fully see until they were already made. He married Claire Whitfield 4 years ago. Claire is 32, tall, beautiful in the specific way of someone who works at it constantly and resents that they have to. She is charming in controlled doses and exhausting in large ones. She managed a lifestyle Instagram account with approximately 40,000 followers and a gift for making everything look curated and intentional, including, as I eventually understood, people. I had tried with Claire. I want to say that too. I had tried in the ways that mothers-in-law try. Giving space, being available, staying out of the way of decisions that weren't mine to make, accepting the version of my son she presented back to me on Sunday visits with a warm smile and a dish I wasn't quite sure she had actually cooked. There was also Sophie. Sophie is 5 years old, and she belongs to both of them, and she is the specific reason that everything that happened during those 3 weeks cost more than money. Sophie has Ron's eyes. She calls me Grammy, and she insists on sitting in my lap even when there is a perfectly good chair available, and I love her with an entirety that I could not have predicted and cannot fully describe. That is who was in that house. That is what was at stake. It started the way these things always start, with something small enough to dismiss. 11 months before the birthday dinner, Claire asked to borrow my debit card for groceries. Ethan was between jobs for a few weeks, she explained, and she'd left her wallet at home, and it would just be this once, and of course she'd pay me back. $83.47. I never saw it again. I told myself it was awkward to ask. I told myself they were going through a tight patch and pride made these things complicated. I told myself Ron would have said the same thing. Let it go, Dot. It's not worth the tension. So I let it go. Second time was a spa charge. $240 on my Visa, which Claire had borrowed the week prior for a pharmacy run. She mentioned it later as if it were already resolved. Oh, that spa visit. I've been meaning to sort that out. And then we moved on to talking about Sophie's preschool, and the topic closed itself without being closed. I noticed. I told myself I was being petty. Third time. A hotel receipt that appeared on my credit statement in April. 4 nights at a Marriott in Scottsdale, Arizona. $1,140. I had not been to Arizona. I had not given anyone my credit card. Claire had borrowed it once in March to pick up a prescription when she said she'd left her wallet at the pediatrician's office. This time, my stomach dropped. I mentioned it to Ethan gently on a Sunday when Claire had taken Sophie to the park. I said there was a charge I couldn't account for, and I was confused. He nodded attentively and said he'd look into it and brought out lemon cookies from a bakery bag on the counter. Lemon cookies, my favorite. He knew that. He had known that since he was 8 years old and we used to make them together on Saturday afternoons. He hadn't brought me anything in 3 years. I should have heard that clearly. The sound of my son handing me something sweet because he needed to soften something he knew was wrong. Instead, I ate a cookie and felt the warmth of being remembered and let the hotel charge drift to the back of my mind. That's the part that is hardest to write down. Not the theft, not the planning, not the documents I found later. The cookies. The way being loved by your child can be used against you as precisely as any other tool, if someone has learned how to hold it. I heard them on a Wednesday night in October. I had gotten up at 12:17 a.m. for water. I have trouble sleeping since Ron died. It comes and goes in cycles. And I was coming down the hallway when I heard Claire's voice from the living room. She and Ethan had had stayed late for dinner, and I'd assumed they were asleep in the guest room. They were not asleep. Claire's voice was low and sharp, the way she spoke when she had decided something and was explaining her decision to someone slower than herself. She melts every time you call her mom like you actually mean it. A pause. Ethan said nothing. That silence was a shape. It occupied space in that hallway, and it pressed against my chest, and I stood very still with my water glass and listened. Then Claire. We use her credit line. Buy the car Friday. Say it was a mistake later. By the time she figures out the paperwork, we're already past the grace period. Another pause. Ethan said something too low to catch. Claire. She's not going to fight us, Ethan. She never does. I stood in the hallway for approximately 30 seconds after their voices moved to something else. Then I walked back to my bedroom very quietly and set my water glass on the nightstand and lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep, but I also did not cry, and I did not storm down the hallway, and I did not let the enormous thing rising in my chest become a sound, because something had shifted, standing in that hallway, that I recognized as a kind of clarity I had not felt in a long time, the kind that comes when you stop hoping you've misunderstood something and accept what you've understood perfectly. She's not going to fight us. I made a list, not of feelings, not of grievances, a list. By 2:30 a.m., I had the shape of what needed to happen. Thursday morning, 9:15 a.m. And I was sitting across from Melissa Torres at First National Bank, associate branch manager, 4 years in that role, the kind of competent and unhurried professional who makes you feel that your problem, however complicated, is within the range of things she has handled before. I wore my blue sweater, my good shoes. I told her I had reason to believe my credit accounts had been accessed without my authorization, and I needed to understand the full extent of the exposure before anything else happened. Melissa pulled the records. The credit line attached to my home equity, a $48,000 line I had established for emergencies and never touched, had been accessed twice in the previous 6 weeks. A $12,000 transfer and an $8,000 transfer, both initiated from an IP address I didn't recognize, both referencing an authorization form Melissa was now showing me on her screen that bore what was claimed to be my signature. It was not my signature. It was close. Close enough to be believed by someone not looking hard. I said, close everything she can touch. Freeze the credit line entirely. Print every transaction going back 12 months. Melissa looked at me steadily. This may become a matter for law enforcement, Mrs. Parker. Do you understand that? I understand, I said. She printed the documents. She slid them across the desk, and she said, you did the right thing. I almost fell apart right there. Not from fear. From something more complicated. From the particular grief of sitting in a bank office receiving confirmation of what your child has allowed to happen to you, and having a stranger's professional kindness be the thing that finally makes it real. I pressed my fingernails into my palm and held myself together. Then I took the envelope of documents, put it in my bag beside my good shoes determination, and drove home to make the second call. My attorney, James Whitfield, no relation to Claire, though I noted the coincidence without amusement, had handled my estate planning since Ron's death. He is 67, methodical, and possessed of the particular gift of making catastrophic information feel navigable. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, he said, I need you to do something before we go any further. I need you to check the estate documents we drew up in 2019, specifically the financial power of attorney. I pulled the folder from my filing cabinet while he waited. The documents were where I had left them, intact, signed by me, witnessed, notarized. But James said, there may have been a parallel application, separate from yours. Claire's name has come up in a guardianship inquiry at the county level. My office received a notification 2 days ago from the probate court, a preliminary filing. He paused carefully. Someone has initiated a proceeding to establish financial guardianship over you. The room was very still. On what grounds? I managed. The filing cites cognitive concerns, forgetfulness, difficulty managing finances. The blood in my face went somewhere else because I had given them that. I had handed it to them without knowing. Every time I had said casually, I'm so forgetful lately, or I couldn't remember where I left my keys, the small offhand complaints of a woman in her 60s, normal, unremarkable, I had been providing material. I understood then that this had not been impulsive. This had been assembled, brick by brick, over months. James, I said slowly, I need everything you can find on that filing. I already requested it, he said. It should come to your door by end of day. The brown envelope arrived at 4:47 p.m. I opened it at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink. Inside, printed emails between Claire and a woman identified as Dr. Sutton. Memory screening referral, Mrs. Parker. Audio clips, brief, of me saying things I recognized. I've been so scattered lately, I can't seem to keep track of things. Edited out of larger conversations, stripped of context, made to sound like evidence of something they were not. And a partial guardianship application, cover page only, with my name typed at the top under the heading, Respondent. And a document titled, Talking Points for Doctor Visit. Claire had made a list. Forgetfulness, paranoia, inability to manage finances, possible isolation from support network. They weren't just stealing my money, they were building a case to steal my mind. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that list for a long time. I looked at the word paranoia. This word Claire had selected to describe a woman noticing strange hotel charges and unexplained bank transfers, as if paying attention were a symptom. And I felt something move through me that had no clean name. Older than anger, colder. folder. I picked up my phone and called James back. "Get me Detective Carol Webb," I said. James had mentioned her name earlier in our call. 14 years in financial crimes at Columbus PD, currently heading elder fraud investigations. "I want to report a fraudulent loan application, unauthorized account access, and a guardianship proceeding initiated on false pretenses." I paused. "And I want it on record before Saturday night." Saturday was the birthday dinner. I had 36 hours. I met Detective Carol Webb on Friday morning at the police station on Marconi Boulevard. She was 51, compact and precise, with reading glasses she pushed up on her head when she was thinking, and the unhurried manner of someone who has heard many versions of many stories and developed an instinct for the real ones. She reviewed Melissa's transaction printouts, James Whitfield's documentation of the guardianship filing, the brown envelope contents, and the recording I had made in my own hallway at 12:17 a.m. I had gone back to my room that night and opened the voice memo app on my phone and set it on my nightstand and left my bedroom door open and captured 4 additional minutes of the conversation I had already overheard. Detective Webb listened to those 4 minutes twice. "The loan application with the forged signature is a clear case of financial identity theft," she said, setting down her glasses. "The guardianship filing built on manufactured evidence is a separate matter. That goes to the probate court and your attorney, and it's serious. People go to prison for this." She looked at me. "Do you want to proceed formally?" "I want to proceed completely," I said. She nodded slowly. "Then here is what I need from you. Don't change your behavior. Don't warn them. Attend the dinner tomorrow night and let us do our job." She handed me a card. "If anything escalates before then, you call this number, any hour." I took the card and put it in my coat pocket and drove home to get ready for a birthday dinner. I want to tell you what it cost to do what I did on Saturday night. Not the legal preparation, not the banking, not the attorney fees and the police report and the brown envelope and the forged signature. Those things were terrible and necessary and cost me money and sleep and the specific grief of a mother understanding what her child had participated in. What it cost me was the performance. I cooked Saturday afternoon, marinated chicken, roasted vegetables, the lemon cake Claire had specifically requested. I made it from scratch, the real recipe, 2 layers with buttercream frosting, and I decorated it with fresh flowers from the garden because Claire liked that. I set the table in the dining room with the good tablecloth and the candles Ron had bought at a market in Portugal the year before he died. I did all of this knowing what was coming. That is the part that required something I don't have a word for. Not acting, deeper than acting. The discipline of a woman who has been a mother long enough to understand that love and grief and fury can all exist in the same body at the same moment, and none of them have to show on your face if you are determined enough about it. Sophie came through the front door at 6 o'clock and ran straight to me. I picked her up and she smelled like children smell, warm and slightly sugary and entirely themselves, and I held her for exactly as long as she would let me before she wriggled down to investigate the cake. Claire arrived in cream. She always dressed for the version of herself she wanted the room to see, and tonight's version was warm and happy and grateful. A woman being celebrated by family, soft-lit and uncomplicated. Ethan was in a blazer. He hugged me at the door, slightly longer than usual, and said, "You look good, Mom." His voice was practiced. The 2 witnesses, friends of theirs, Jenna and Mark, people I had met twice, arrived just after. They were pleasant and had been told I could see that this was a celebration. They had no idea they were stage dressing. Over dinner, things were carefully normal. I watched Claire watch Ethan. I watched him touch her shoulder at the right moments and reach for her hand at the right moments and perform the language of a happy couple for an audience. I watched him look at me with a warmth that I now understood was a tool, not a feeling. I watched all of it, and I passed the rolls and asked Jenna about her work and cut more cake for Sophie and waited. After dessert, Ethan cleared his throat. This is the part he had practiced. He talked about family security, about protecting the future, about Sophie deserving stability. He was measured and warm and reasonable, every word chosen to make what came next feel like a gift. Claire sat with her hands folded, her face arranged in the expression of a woman patiently enduring something already decided. Then Ethan slid the folder across the table. "Just sign, Mom. No pressure, no pressure." That phrase, delivered with a smile, in front of witnesses, over lemon cake, in the house I had shared with his father for 34 years. I looked at the folder, then at Ethan, then at Claire. I looked at Sophie, who was arranging the flowers I had cut for the table into a small pile and paying no attention to any of us. I took a slow breath, and the dining room door opened. He came through quietly, which made his presence more disruptive than noise would have been. Gray suit, mid-50s. The expression of a man who has walked into many rooms exactly like this one and feels neither rushed nor apologetic about it. He looked at me first, then at the folder on the table, then at Ethan. "Mrs. Parker, do not sign anything." The room had the specific silence of something stopping mid-motion. Claire's hand froze where it had been moving toward the folder. Ethan's color left him in a single instant. The man introduced himself. "Robert Fenn, from the Fraud Response Division of First National Bank, acting in coordination with Detective Webb's office on an active investigation into unauthorized use of my credit accounts and a fraudulent loan application bearing a forged signature." He held up credentials. He placed a business card on the table. He said, "Any person present who has knowledge of or participation in these applications may have legal exposure. I'd recommend everyone in this room think carefully before proceeding." Claire stood up so so fast her chair scraped the hardwood floor. "We are in the middle of a private family dinner. Then this is a very bad place for financial pressure," Robert Fenn said, with a calm so complete it was its own form of statement. I stood up. I looked around that room, the candles, the good tablecloth, the lemon cake with 2 pieces missing, Jenna and Mark sitting very still with the expressions of people who have just realized they are in a completely different event than the one they were invited to. And I spoke. I told Jenna and Mark everything. Not in a rush, not in a spiral, but the way you tell a story you have rehearsed in your own mind for 36 hours, because you needed to be able to say it clearly in front of people who would remember it correctly. The hotel charge, the spa charges, the forged signature on the loan application, the emails to the doctor, the guardianship filing, the list Claire had typed titled Talking Points, with the word paranoia on it to describe a woman who had noticed her own money disappearing. The car across the street with the silver bow. "They planned to call me confused if I refused to sign," I said. "They wanted control of my house, my credit line, my legal decision-making. They used my granddaughter's name in a document designed to strip me of my own." Jenna's hand came up to her mouth. Mark stopped looking at Ethan. Completely. The way you stop looking at someone when you have decided you don't know them anymore. Claire turned to Ethan. "Say something," she said. He was looking at the table. His face was the face of a boy who had just fully understood what he had done. Not the plan of it, not the execution of it, but the totality. The weight of sitting in his mother's house at his mother's table, eating his mother's cake and sliding a folder across the cloth toward the woman who had driven him to school for 12 years and held him through his father's death, asking her to sign away her own mind. He said nothing. Sophie looked up from her flowers, sensing the room without understanding it, and reached for my hand. I took it. I picked up my purse with my other hand, and I walked toward the door. Ethan's voice came from behind me, unsteady. "Mom, please don't take Sophie away from me." I stopped. I turned. I looked at my son, this man I had loved since before he had a name, who had brought me lemon cookies while his wife planned the documents, who had smiled at me across tables and called me mom with a warmth I had believed for 11 months was real. And I said, "You should have thought about that before you used her future as bait." And then I walked out the door. I drove home. I locked every door. I brought Sophie into my room because she had fallen asleep in the car, and I wasn't going to put her in the guest room alone. And I sat in the dark in the chair beside my bed and listened to her breathe and waited for my hands to stop shaking. They took about 20 minutes. At 10:48 p.m., headlights swept across the bedroom curtain. I went to the window, both of them on the front porch. Ethan pale, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man who has not slept. Claire was crying. Not the contained, private way of genuine grief, but the particular projected kind, loud enough to reach the houses on either side. A performance in search of an audience. I watched Claire wipe her face and straighten her dress and shift her weight into the stance of a woman preparing to explain herself to the next available person. 45 seconds of cry, 45 seconds of reset. I had watched her do it at Ron's funeral when the attention had moved away from her. I understood it now with a clarity I hadn't had then. At 10:52 p.m., a police cruiser turned onto my street. Detective Webb had told me, when we met Friday morning, that a patrol check would be made at my address Saturday evening as a precautionary measure, given the active investigation. She had not told me exactly when. She was thoughtful that way. Claire saw the cruiser before it reached the house. I watched the calculation move across her face in real time. The assessment, the adjustment, the rapid construction of a new version of events that would fit this new audience. She had the expression assembled by the time the officers stepped out of the car, and I opened the front door first. I stood on my own porch, in my own doorway, in my good shoes, and I looked at the two officers, and then at Ethan and Claire, and I said, "Good evening, I'm Dorothy Parker. I believe Detective Webb's office may have briefed you on the situation. I have documentation inside if you need it." Claire's expression, in the light from the porch, went through 3 stages in about 4 seconds. The 3rd stage was the one I will keep. The legal process that followed was not fast, but it was thorough. Fraud cases rarely move quickly, and this one had several layers that each required their own timeline. The fraudulent loan application, the one bearing my forged signature, the one that had funded a red sports car with a silver bow, was prosecuted under Ohio's identity theft statutes. Claire was the primary subject of the criminal investigation. Robert Fenn's office and Detective Webb's unit coordinated documentation across the bank's fraud division and the county financial crimes records. And by December, Claire had been charged with financial identity theft and forgery. The car was repossessed. The guardianship proceeding, the one Claire had quietly initiated through a probate filing using manufactured evidence of my cognitive decline, was formally dismissed by the court after James Whitfield submitted a response packet that included the talking points document, the audio clips used out of context, and a sworn affidavit from my own physician, Dr. Margaret Reese, who had been my doctor for 9 years, and was, to put it precisely, furious. Dr. Reese, board certified in internal medicine, 22 years in practice, submitted a 3-page statement documenting my cognitive health, my medical history, and her professional assessment that the guardianship filing had no clinical basis and constituted, in her words, a deliberate and cynical misuse of elder protection statutes. She also filed a separate complaint with the Ohio Medical Board regarding the doctor Claire had been attempting to manipulate into a referral. That complaint is ongoing. The $20,000 taken from my credit line was fully recovered through the civil action James filed in parallel. Claire's assets, such as they were insufficient to cover the full damages judgment immediately, but a structured payment arrangement was ordered by the court. Ethan was not criminally charged because his direct involvement in the financial fraud was documentably less than Claire's, and because what he had done occupied a legal gray area that Detective Webb described to me carefully and honestly as difficult to prosecute without a clearer evidentiary trail. He had known. He had allowed it. He had sat at my table and smiled and brought me cookies and called me mom when it was useful. None of that is a crime the law has a clean statute for. That is a different kind of reckoning. Ethan called me in January. I let it ring twice, and then I answered, because he is my son and I am his mother, and those two facts have not changed, even though everything around them has. He said he was sorry. He said it several times, in several ways, with the particular, careful sincerity of someone who has had months to understand what they did and is not trying to minimize it. He did not make excuses for Claire. He did not ask me to minimize what had happened. He said he had been weak and greedy, and he had let someone he loved talk him into something he knew was wrong, and the fact that he knew it was wrong and did it anyway was something he had to live with. I listened. Then I said, Ethan, I know you're sorry. I believe you mean it, but sorry is where we start, not where we end up. He said, I know. We are in the somewhere between start and wherever we end up. It is slow and it is not comfortable, and I don't know its shape yet. Someday I might. For now, it is enough that we are still in it. Claire and Ethan separated in March. I did not feel the satisfaction I might have expected. I felt the weight of it, the weight of a marriage ending, of a family structure that Sophie will now grow up inside of, restructured and difficult, and not what any of us would have chosen for her. Sophie still calls me Grammy. She still insists on sitting in my lap, even when there is a perfectly good chair. She brought me a drawing last week of what she identified as our two faces, side by side, which was primarily circles, but was recognizable by the addition of what she described as my good shoes. I have it on the refrigerator.